Okay, we're underway.
Yeah. Thanks, Mel.
Thanks.
Gabby, you're still on mute as well. If you wouldn't mind unmuting, please. Uh, Hi, Victoria. Hello. Thank you. Um, Sorry about this, guys. We're just sort of figuring out a couple of things here too. Hey, guys. Hey, Victoria and Bronwyn. We'll wait a couple of seconds now. We're trying to get this passcode out to everybody. Apologies for the start, everybody. And a special apologies to Gabby, who we really appreciate bearing with us. Yeah, well, I'm excited too, Victoria. Really excited. Yeah, apparently Zoom has changed. Thanks, Gabby. Apparently Zoom has changed how the link with passcodes and things work. I'm not really sure, but unfortunately chucked a spanner in the works there. So I've just posted the passcode onto the Facebook group, so hopefully a few people will see that. Yeah. Uh, Passcode. Sorry, all. Just trying to sort out a couple of things. 916395. All right. And look, end of the day too, we'll have the recording, so we will make sure that we put it onto the YouTube, and we can share it with everybody who missed the chat tonight. They'll be able to watch it whenever they like. Um, Thank you everyone for being here and being a part of Ben's book club. And apologies again for the delay. Really excited to talk to Gabby tonight. I've actually been really looking forward to talking with you, Gabby, ever since I read your book. I've been wanting to pick your brain on your thoughts on teaching in general. Being a high school teacher myself, um, just really excited to have you here tonight. I'll introduce Gabby, but if you wouldn't mind, guys, just typing in chat, perhaps. Actually, you know what? This will be interesting. Can you guys type? Do you have a relationship with a teacher in Australia at all? Is this a teacher in your family, or perhaps you know a friend, or even if you are a teacher, I'd love to hear about where we're from and where our relationships are with teaching as a profession. But Gabby, let's introduce Gabby. Gabbie Stroud is a freelance writer and novelist, and I love this phrase, Gabby, a recovering teacher. After years of juggling the demands of the primary classroom, she made the painful decision to leave the profession she had loved, which I'm sure was really difficult, Gabby. I'd love to chat with you about that. In 2016, her critical commentary on Australia's education system was published in Griffith Review's edition 51, Fixing the System, which went on to be shortlisted for a Walkley Award, which is massive. Gabby's smash hit memoir Teacher was shortlisted for Biography Book of the Year at 2018 ABA Awards and continues to contribute to the National Dialogue on Education. And then in 2020, her book Dear Parents, which was a really great title and premise for a book, I think, offered a passionate call to arms for parents, which is massive as well. The things that matter most is her debut fiction for adults. This wonderful book, this one here, which we're talking about tonight. Love this book. But this is her debut fiction work for adults. She lives on Ewan Nation on the far south coast of New South Wales with her really awesome daughters, Olivia and Sophie. Gabby, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. And what a beautiful introduction, Ben. I'm always a little bit overwhelmed when that gets read out because I'm like, who's that chick? I don't know her. She sounds even overachiever.
It's an impressive bio. Thing I love about you, Gabby, too, is that you have such a heart for teachers and you're such an advocate for teachers. And I feel that too. When I talk to you and whenever we chat, you always seem to be piercing me with your eyes and asking me, how are you actually, Ben, as a teacher? How are you really? Don't give me the fluff. Yeah, I'm good. Well, how are you? I love that. So I appreciate that about you, Gabby.
Thank you. I get that a lot. There's obviously just something about me. And when I meet teachers and I ask them that question, sometimes they just burst into tears. And I've just met them, they've just bought my book or something. And then we're having a hug and they're crying. So I don't know
That's
if it's
lovely.
the effect of me or if I am like a teacher whisperer.
I think probably both. And I think too, it's so, I mean, it's probably the same for all professions too, but it's just really rare to feel truly seen by a person
Mm-hmm.
and to be known, like the struggle of how difficult it can be some days, and also the joys of it too. And because you really seem to capture us, um, yeah, it makes you feel less isolated, I guess. Where sometimes you can't even talk with colleagues openly about things. It's like you can.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know whether you can see the chat. We've got a lot of people here. Bronwyn is saying all her family are teachers, just not her. I wonder, Bronwyn, if you'd seen the workload come home, perhaps. We've got a middle school teacher, Becca from Brisbane. My mum is also a recovering teacher. I'm from Brisbane too, guys. I work at Bribie Island, so we might have crossed paths with some people. Steve from Brisbane. Hey, Steve. Have a good friend who's a teacher, teacher's aide and school librarian. Yeah, got a lot of people here who are teachers. I'll keep intermittently going back to the Facebook to see if I can find some more people in either passcode. But Gabby, let's start with this question. Can you tell us what are some of your fondest memories of some of your teachers? Some people who taught you, what do you remember about them? Because I actually struggle to answer this question, if I can be honest.
Gosh, that is a good question. I wasn't expecting that, Ben. Look,
Sorry.
probably the teacher that had the most profound impact on me was Mrs. D, my Year 9 English teacher,
Mm.
who recognised my talent for writing. And she said to me, Gabrielle, you have a gift. And the way she said
Wow,
it,
that's massive.
it just lit something up inside me.
Mm.
Oddly though, rather than sort of leaning into writing, it made me want to be a teacher. The way she said that, I just thought,
Oh, that's
I
pretty
want to be
sweet.
the giver of the gift, you know. I want to be the person that lights other people up. So I think I always reach for Mrs. D when I think of a teacher who really impacted me. But look, I remember school in sort of great detail, and I can remember
Mm.
the teachers that taught me to read. Remember Mrs. Renford, my kindergarten teacher, and she was very
Wow.
strict on the home readers that would come
Yep.
home, and I really wanted to get to the next level, but I was never quite there, and that was very frustrating for me. Um,
Mm.
I can remember Mr. McKendrick, and if you were very good, he'd call you out and he'd draw a little something on your hand. If
Oh,
you
that's cute, man. I love that stuff.
quiet as a mouse, he'd draw a mouse. Um,
Ah,
yeah, and I can just remember, I remember so much of school, both primary school and secondary school, and the teachers were a huge part of that. Yeah, I can remember Miss Bristow, the first time we ever had a female like sports head of sports department in our secondary school. That seemed shocking that a woman would do that job. I remember so much of it, and I think I was one of those kids that kind of was able to read a little bit of some subtext of what was going on in a school culture.
yeah,
Just
okay.
felt natural to me and an interesting place.
Yeah, right. Um, I mean, that's incredible that you have such distinct memories of some of those things because mine, I feel more like I can just remember a blur, but then there are these moments that I remember just one or two things. And sometimes they were like not great memories, but oftentimes they were about those moments that a teacher really spoke to me.
Mm.
Um, as a teacher, I try to remember that every day. I can't be quick with my words. Like I have to be very considered with the things I say because you never know how it's going to cut into a kid or how an opportunity could pass you by where you could lift them up. Um, and so this is really where your passion for teaching began. Can you talk us a little bit about your teaching experience and what caused you to become, as it says, a recovering teacher in your bio? Like what led you to that? I'm sure it was a very difficult decision.
Yeah, it was difficult. I was one of those people who I left school, went straight to university and became a teacher and then went straight back to school. Um, gap years weren't really a thing back when I finished high school. It's only been sort of this century that we've needed to give kids a year to recover from
Mm,
school. And I couldn't wait.
understandably.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to become a teacher. And my first appointment was over in London in the UK. I won an award. I won a pre-service teaching award, and
Wow.
was given $3,000 at the end of university. And so I was like, well, there's a plane ticket around the world, and off I went to London. And I still remember that moment of being in front of a class of year 6 East End London kids, and they're sort of saying, how long have you been teaching? And I'm checking my watch going, about 30 minutes now. And then I returned to Australia. I taught in ACT, and I taught in New South Wales primary school settings. I loved it. I couldn't see myself doing anything else. I just loved it. I especially loved teaching kids to read. I was very
Mm,
good at that, and I'm a good reader myself, and I love to write. So I really loved doing that. I know I was very good at building relationships with kids and connections. And yeah, I just thought I thought I would be doing it until retirement. And then as the years rolled on, it's like the job really changed. They rolled out all this standardization,
yeah.
national testing became high stakes, and the national curriculum, and then the national professional standards, and the documentation was just starting to outweigh everything I was meant to be doing, that the teaching
Yeah.
kids to read and the building the relationships. And I had this terrible moment it was in 2013, and I was teaching kindergarten. It was the end of the year. I was assessing a little kid, and like this little kid, he'd never been to preschool. He was from a single parent family. His mum had some addiction issues. And look, the miracle for that kid was that he'd been at school all year. That was the achievement. And yet I still had to run him through this battery of tests at the end of the year to see how he had performed. And I
Okay, yeah, I get you.
knew he was going to fail all of them, and yet I still had to do it. And
But
strange.
the victory was that he was there at all. That was the thing that he passed. Yeah, I get you.
That's what should have been celebrated.
Yeah.
And instead, I'm sort of pushing him through this test. And I was so morally and ethically conflicted. And then oddly, my assistant principal walked in, and she used a really funny expression. She said, because I was testing him, and she said, Canberra just rang, they're waiting on your results. And I think she just meant like the department, like it just needed they were waiting on my spreadsheet to get uploaded so they could send it all off.
Yeah.
But the way she said Canberra just rang, like I was like the Prime Minister, like it's waiting on this information. And then it felt like I was having a heart attack, because I just thought, what am I doing? Like,
Yeah.
who wants this data that I've supposedly failed this little boy,
Yeah.
or that this little boy has supposedly failed his first year of school? Nothing felt right about it. And I started to have what I thought was a heart attack, but what was a panic attack. And
Wow.
I went straight to my doctor, and I said to him, Frank, I'm having a heart attack. And he had been consulting with me over the last 2 years. He had me on antidepressants. I was seeing a psychologist. It had been sort of a decline to this point.
It was like
And
build up sort of thing.
yeah, he looked at me and said, yeah, maybe a heart attack, and maybe your heart's just broken. So yeah, I went
Shame,
home.
Gabby. I don't. It's horrible. Oh, sorry. I sympathize. Like I can
Yeah,
see where you got there. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's a
Um.
real heartbreak. It's terrible.
Yeah. It's well, and I think it's. I really admire the way that you held on to your heart in that. Like I think it could have been really easy to just harden your heart and to go, you know what, I'm just going to test it, and then slowly
Yeah,
lose that thing that made you such a wonderful teacher, which is your compassion and your ability to connect with people. But I know I know it's really easy as a teacher to actually just shut that part of you off and just get the job done, just tick the box because that's what you get paid to do, right? Um, and talking about all of these things, can I ask how the response has been for your two non-fiction books about teaching, Teacher and Dear Parents? What have you heard from teachers about those books?
I get messages from teachers every single day. And
Wow.
yeah, so Teacher was the story, it's a memoir, the story of how I got into teaching, how I enjoyed it and loved it, how it changed, and how I left. And that book, it still astonishes me to say it was a bestseller, shortlisted for awards. It still sells really well. And teachers contact me and say to me, your story is my story. And that's just incredible to me, because how can it be that, say, a principal teaching in metropolitan Sydney, for example, a male, can email me and say, your story is my story, when we're in complete different contexts?
Yeah.
It just really speaks to me that there's some sort of commonality with a teacher's heart and that relational work that we do. I think those books have been extremely well received by teachers. I'm not sure that they resonate as strongly with the wider audience. I think, particularly
Really?
parents. I think Dear Parents, parents that read that who are not teachers find it quite a challenging text. I remember having a conversation with someone who actually worked at Booktopia. And so you can
Yeah.
sort of imagine someone from Booktopia has probably had quite a good education themselves and has maybe a bit
Yeah.
of good cultural capital behind them, pretty well placed in the world. And one of the things I write in Dear Parents is, you can't just drop your kid off at school and 13 years later pick them up and expect the job to be done. You as the parent are the lifelong educator. There's a lot
Mhm.
you've got to do. And this person said to me, I actually expect that. I expect you're going to teach them the manners and, all these things, not just
Wow.
yeah. And I was a little bit sort of like, you might need to read the book again. That's not what schools exist. We're not here to raise your child. We're here to
Yeah.
teach you a curriculum and yes, of course, care and build relationships and do our best by those that are vulnerable. But I'm sort of thinking, your child, it's not my job to teach your child manners. So yeah, it's interesting to hear how, or to consider how those books have been received by people who aren't teachers.
That's part of the point though too, is to sort of push back against that type of thinking, right? And hopefully some readers who have read those books and even read, I mean, you can hear or see how so many of these different thoughts of yours
Yeah.
are captured emotionally in this book, which I will talk about in a second. But I think that's part of it, isn't it? Is that you want someone to be thinking, oh yeah, maybe, which, sorry, speaking as a teacher, it just feels like, you know, that should be obvious that we're not there to be, moral police and value police and
Mm,
to, I mean, I love how a school can foster a sense of community. And yes, they can foster a sense of values, but if their values aren't at home and they're only at school,
mm.
they're not going to be go deep. They have to be mirrored at the very least, I think. Um, let's talk about this book.
Yeah.
You've taken all these things that you've been talking about, all these things about the system and teachers and the heart for people, and not to talk too much about certain things, although we will talk about spoilers a bit later on. But talking about panic attacks and things like that, right? In here, um, what was the thinking behind actually starting work on this book, which is your first novel for adults? Is this something that you'd always aimed for? Is it just, where did it come from?
Yeah, I've always wanted to be a fiction writer. So the fact that I wrote two non-fictions first, that was when I was actually out of my depth and didn't know what I was doing. Now that I'm writing fiction, I feel a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more at home.
Okay.
But look, I actually started writing this book straight after I wrote Teacher, so way back in 2018. And the origin story came from a terrible thing that had happened at my school. So the year I left was 2013, and the year after that, while I was having a year of leave without pay and recovering from burnout, a child was killed at my school. He went home, he caught the bus home, and he went to cross the road, a highway, and as he did every day, and the light wasn't good. There was an inexperienced driver cresting the hill, and that young man was hit and killed. And it I don't know, I just kept thinking about, like, that's very sad that that child died, and I feel the sadness for his family and for the community, but I just couldn't stop thinking about the teachers, because that little boy was loved by a whole group of people who didn't get, there was no sort of sympathy poured out for them and what they had lost. And I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I talked to my colleagues a lot about it, because I was really worried about how they were going, because I know that if I had have been teaching still at that time, that would have tipped me over the edge. I don't know how my mental health would have coped with that, because I was pretty fragile before. And a lot of them, when I talked to them, I heard a lot of if only. So there's a young teacher, and he was saying, I can remember that afternoon, and all the kids had come down to, or some of the big senior kids had come down to his room, and they were watching funny cat videos on YouTube. And he had said, "Hey, you're meant to be on the bus." He pointed to this kid and went, "Get down to the bus lines." If only I hadn't done that.
It's hard, man. And he has to live with that. That's not good.
Yeah. And every teacher had an if only story like that. And it just got me thinking about how for teachers, there's a lot of if only that goes on for us, when we see kids. I mean, that was a freak accident, but we watch kids struggle with stuff. We can watch kids sort of slipping through cracks that we can't really do a lot about, because their home life looks a particular way or whatever. And as a teacher, you carry that if only burden, and I wanted to just explore that. What does that look like? What does that feel like for teachers? It was interesting when I wrote this book, when you put in my first manuscript that went in, my first draft, the editorial comment that came back was, "We really loved the voice of Lionel. We loved how you wrote him, the year 6 student that's in the book. Could we have more of him? Could you devote some more chapters? We'd love to see you take him home, show us what he's like at home." And they wanted more of his voice, and I was like, no, because I want this book to read like just the way teachers experience. And we don't get to go home with the kids.
No, it's fragments we get.
We're just trying to piece together the little bits that we can get from the clues that they give us, sometimes that kids give us directly, and then the other clues that we're picking up just by observing little things, like how they speak to one another, or how they relate to their sibling, or whether they've got food in their lunchbox. I mean, I always want to please my publisher and the editor, like you want to work in partnership with them, but I had to say, no, I don't think that's going to serve the story, because I want this book to read. I want, when people finish this, I want them to feel as though they were a teacher.
Well, I think you achieve that. I think, like I was saying, the fragmented way that you sort of get glimpses into things, but, you've got 24, 26, 27 sometimes other little humans in the room with you. It's like a 1 minute's worth of attention you can spare per day, focused attention. It is fragments. I think most teachers, and myself included, have experienced the if onlys, like you say. And I think as a teacher, unfortunately, there is going to be tragedy. It's an emotional job. Hey, it's not a go to work and collect a paycheck sort of job. It's an emotional ringer. It's an intellectual ringer. It's an emotional, it's organizational. And sometimes trying to relate that to people like the way I'm doing now. Like it just feels inadequate to say. And I think a book, a work of fiction like your book, does a great job of like letting us, To Kill a Mockingbird, walk a mile in a person's shoes, right? So I've really appreciated that this book. I'm going to take it to work if that's okay. I've only got one copy, but I was going to put it up on the staff table.
Yeah.
Um, and guys, too, in the audience, you are very welcome to post questions into the chat at any time if you have a question for Gabbie, just about her book and her work. We've got a question here from Steve, which is really astute, and this is what I was wanting to talk to you about. This as well. Was Derek's character reflected of your sort of the ending of your teaching career, in that he goes through those moments where he's having to what? So sorry, it's just so spot on. That's why I'm laughing. It's a laugh of
Yeah.
knowing me, like having to fuss up old unit plans and things like that you just had to check a box on from 3 years ago to make sure it was all lined up for the audit. Was that sort of how you were feeling? Was Derek a very relatable character for you?
Yeah, Derek's the kind of teacher I would have liked, this kind of leader I would have liked to work for. Like he's the assistant principal and in the book, and he's always had his eyes on the things that matter most, the kids, his colleagues, the lessons, the learning,
Mm,
community. And then he has these terrible moments where he's asked to produce all this paperwork that he hasn't done, and he really has to question what are the things that matter most. And that was definitely me in that moral and ethical dilemma when Canberra rang and wanted my results. I was like, what matters here is that this child showed up for school and that his mum got him here, and but
yeah.
Rick is also having panic attacks and anxiety attacks, and it manifests in his chest, tension in his chest, and he thinks maybe he's having heart attacks, and he is chewing down heartburn tablets like there's no tomorrow, until he sort of admits that he's actually almost wishing that it would be a heart attack. And I think right now there are a lot of teachers out there who, just like a touch of COVID, so I can have a few days off. And I do hear tragic stories.
Sorry, if you see me laughing, it's only because you're saying very true things. I'm just, yeah, just
Yeah,
remembering things that I won't share on the mic. But yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, sorry, Gabbie, go on.
I hear from teachers who drive to school, sort of crying the whole way, get to school, park in the car park, and literally from there ring in sick because they just can't make that last little bit from the car park into the school. It's just too much. So I think Derek is very true to how many teachers feel. Um,
Hmm.
it's only now that Steve's just asked that question that I'm sort of thinking, yeah, I probably was a lot like Derek, sort of quietly falling apart. And Derek
Yeah.
does that thing that teachers are very good at, of put the poker face on, put the mask on, nothing to see here, I'm fine, ducks on the
Mhm.
water, legs are going like this underneath.
Mhm.
When really he's, if he had a drop dead, it kind of could have been justified. And people have read it saying, oh, I thought he was going to have a stroke, because there was so much
Yeah.
pressure on him, and he was so far behind with his work. So I probably was in some ways like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you about the world of being a teacher. You set up this world so well and it felt so real. But I'm wondering for you, what were some of the things that were the most important to get in there to sort of relay that sense of reality? Like was it down to the sharpening of pencils and the decorating of the room only to have it go unnoticed? Or, what was it about there that you wanted to put in there to give that sense of realism?
The thing that was most important for me was probably not the school stuff, because actually what you can do, readers are quite astute, and every reader's pretty much gone to school. And I think you can paint with fairly broad brushstrokes,
Yeah.
and people are there because we've all got some vague memory of school. And for me, adding in those little details, it's quite easy because I went to school and I have great memories of school, like I'm able to recall them well. And also then I went to school and taught. So I've big repository there. So I knew I could do that. But the thing that I wanted to really get right was writing about small town life. and
Yeah.
what it is to be in a small town and to be a teacher in a small town, because
Hmm.
that's really nuanced. And I often read, I read lots, and I read stuff that's set in small towns, and I've always lived in small towns. And when it's not done right, it kind of annoys me. Um, I'm like, well, isn't that convenient that you know that
Yeah.
works like that? And I'm like, that actually small towns don't work like that. You know, we're not all sitting in the pub at a particular time to enable that conversation to happen. You know, it's more nuanced than
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I like
That
that. That's important. Yeah.
bothered me. So I did spend a lot of time researching that, because I grew up in the Snowy Mountains around Jindabyne and Cooma area.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
and so I know that kind of small town, that's very seasonal, touristy work at tourism, mountains, snow.
Hmm.
I live on Ewan Nation, the far south coast of New South Wales, Merimbula. So that's again
I
coastal.
love Marimbula.
Yeah, it's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
dairy farmers and all that sort of thing. But I wanted this to be more. I didn't want it to have a mountain flavor or a coastal flavor, because they're different. I just wanted it to be sort of an anywhere town, so that
Space. Yeah. I get you.
readers could relate to it. So I took a little trip to central New South Wales and had a little travel around there when I was writing the book, just to sort of see what were the similarities between the small towns I knew and then what made those towns different as well. So
Hmm.
yeah, so that was a lot of fun, being in, you know, Canowindra and Orange and all those sorts of
Yeah.
places. The
Yeah.
mouse plague on, you know, and things like that. You're just like, oh my goodness, I've never experienced that. But yeah.
That's cool. I like that. That's really, yeah. Yeah, and as you say that, it does, you do capture that reality as well. I grew up in a small town in Gippsland, so that all the things in there ring true as well. It felt a very true book, very relatable for me. Um, there's a couple of questions in here. One from Emily, which is really interesting, and feel free to pass on this one because it's a bit controversial, perhaps. But want to give all your characters a hug, which I think is a common refrain in the reviews I read for this book. I felt the same way, Emily. But Emily asks, "What are your thoughts on the New South Wales teacher who had the assault charge overturned?" I'm not sure if you've seen what that was about. No. There was a teacher who was it was caught on video, but he was, I would put it mildly in saying that he was getting a lot of physical abuse and verbal abuse from a bunch of students, um, and it resulted in him eventually hitting a student. And now he has been cleared of the assault charge. And I guess Emily's just wondering about your opinion on that. And I guess, yeah, what are your thoughts in general about, I guess, the way teachers can get hard pressed sometimes in that regard?
Mm. This is a great question, and it just speaks to the complexity of the work that teachers are called to do. So, like, absolutely, fundamentally, we should not hit kids. That's a blanket thing, right? And I'm sure we would all agree on that.
Mhm.
But then I'm also like, get back to me after kids have been, someone else's kids as well, have been at you all day, swearing at you, assaulting you, repeatedly threatening you, attacking you, sometimes physically, verbally. It becomes a lot more difficult to just hold on to that blanket thing of we don't hit a child. And I know that I've seen behaviors in even very small children that have made my hand itch, to not to strike them or anything, but to grab at them and pull them back when they're harming another child or hurting me, or doing dangerous things. It's a really, really difficult
To
place to
spot.
be. And
It
so
is.
much of student behavior that we're seeing now, if we saw it in a cafe or on a bus or whatever, we'd all be revolted and disgusted by that young person's behavior. But when it happens in a school, it's a different scenario, and we seem to expect that teachers will have beyond human capacity to resist the human urge to self-defend or to protect another student or to protect a colleague. So look, my compassion is always going to lean toward the teacher.
Yeah.
because I know that if we look after teachers well, they'll look after students well. Right now, I think there's too much focus on how do we make things all lovely and great for students, and that's not the right way to go about it. You need to look after the staff, you need to look after the teachers, because then they know how to make things great for the students. So I heard something said today, a psychologist who works in the education space was saying, I'm tired of teachers being the collateral damage for a system that's very broken. And I would say it really applies to this story.
All right. Well, thank you, Gabbie, for answering that. That was really, yeah, thank you. We've got a question from Dave, which is, and yeah, thank you, Emily. That's nice of you. We've got a question from Dave that is sort of turning back to the actual crafting of your novel here. Dave was mentioning that he loved the character development and how you had different chapters and different viewpoints. And so that must have been really fun for you, but obviously that's a challenge as an author to sort of sequentially put this in order. How did you craft this? How did you think about it? Did you have a big map? Did you have corkboards and string? How did you go about it?
Yep. I have sticky notes. I'm not at my own house at the moment, but normally I'd be able to show you colorful sticky notes. Every character had their own color, and I would track really carefully what had happened for each character and where they were going. I also had a binder, and each character had their own file, and I could tell you their star sign and their all sorts of stuff that doesn't go in the book, but all their backstory, so that I really knew who they were and what they were about and how long they'd lived in the town, and just everything about them, so that they would feel rich and authentic and like people that we might know. But when I got my first draft back, the publisher, the editor, said to me, because initially I had 6 main characters that we were following through, and they said that's about too many, so I had to cut out 2 characters. Oh my God.
Wait, what?
I know, I nearly died. So Nova had her own chapters, Nova the principal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I had another character, Cora, and she was like student support, like a welfare kind of teacher, not quite a teacher's aide, but in that sort of capacity. So Nova just had to get embedded into everyone else's chapters, and poor old Cora got lifted out. It was some of the hardest work I've ever had to do, because you lift out all those chapters and then suddenly your manuscript just goes from a good solid manuscript down to
it's like a house of cards, right? You take one card out.
Yeah. And then all the
I do not envy that.
Yeah, all the plot points that had happened in those characters' chapters, I had to then go, because things had happened that moved the plot along. So they then had to go and get embedded into the other characters' chapters.
That's hard.
Oh man, it did my head in. It was tough.
Well, like at the end, when Nova has that big, again, we'll get into a little bit of spoilers, because actually almost out of time, which is incredible to me. But at the end, when Nova has that big sort of spiel about, it's almost like a monologue with the TV reporter, but you have Bev there to watch her do that. Did you have to maneuver Bev to be there so that she could do that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because that was all told through Nova's perspective initially.
Of course, yeah.
It was still there, but then I had to flip the whole thing. But you know what? It ended up richer for it. Like if you've got a good editor, man, they can make your work really shine. And the book is definitely better for it. But I sort of had a few moments where I was like, I don't want to write this book anymore. Like that's going to be a lot. Let's write something else, because that's going to be hard.
We've all been there. Yeah, it's editors are so amazing, and they seem to find the heart of the book, and then they just make everything just like straight to that thing that's important. But man, it can be excruciating. I've had my second novel was very similar. I had a lot of different chapters. I can't even get into it. It was just
I don't want to talk about it.
It just feels like you're moving. It's like pawns. It's like a chessboard with pieces, but all the pieces are murky and you can't see the chessboard. But you have to put them in the right position for the next thing. And it's just like, wait, did he have a hat in chapter 3? Gosh, so I really sympathize with you. Meg wants you to release these chapters, please, she said in chat.
That's a great idea, Meg.
Just like let them come out as the extra Nova chapters, like a
Yeah, yeah,
B-side of the album. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
cool.
It's a cool idea.
Um, Now, just because we've got little time left, I would like to talk about spoilers if that's okay. Adnan in the chat has already talked about spoilers. Adnan, I'm sorry. I hope I pulled over. Adnan was crying at the end, which I think, again, reading a lot of the reviews that I've seen of this book seems to, again, be the most common thing, is that I wanted to hug all the characters. And then number two, I was destroyed and cried and cried and cried. Um, how I guess from talking with you earlier, that was kind of the point of the book. So you always had that in your mind that you needed to gear up to that sort of.
Yeah.
Um, but gosh, that must have been a hard scene to write of Lionel. Um, it's almost hard to talk about. But can you describe how you went about that scene in particular, and maybe the way in which all your characters come out of it afterwards? So I think that's really beautiful and tender stuff you've done there.
Yeah. I always knew he was going to die. It wasn't a question for me. I just always knew that. And it was funny because one of the editorial comments was, "Oh, I'm glad you didn't do the safe thing and, just have him be unwell or whatever." And I was like, "Oh, it wasn't a choice. That wasn't a choice that I made."
Yeah.
I actually spent a lot of time under bridges. When I traveled to central New South Wales, I would go under bridges, and I have this real affection for bridges now because I realize there are a lot of people it's their home.
Yeah.
And that's both troubling, and it's also actually quite beautiful in a bizarre way, that people are trying to cobble together their lives in a place that just feels a little bit safe. So writing that scene was a bit of sort of research like that, spending time under bridges going, what would this have been like? And leaning into those things that my colleagues had told me when that boy had been killed when he hopped off the bus, what that felt like. And also to that, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how kids in schools, for teachers, they become all our kids. They're our kids. We love them. So, like when that boy hopped off the bus and died in real life, for those teachers, he was that's our boy. He belongs to us. He belongs to our school. We all felt a collective ownership or care for that child. And so I wanted to explore that for each of the characters. Even though Tyson, for example, never taught Lionel, but he was one of us. He was part of our community and our school. And so how that impacts you and how that affects you. The bit that gets me, and I've read that book 20 or 30 times, but is always that moment where Lacey, where it sort of twigs for little Lacey that her brother's died and she's only little herself and death is an abstract idea, and just the way she says, "Oh, I'm going to miss him so much."
Yeah.
That bit always gets me.
Breaks your heart. Yeah. And it does break your heart. I actually was really, I was really moved by the way Derek responded,
Oh,
because
yeah.
it was sort of like he finally let go of all the different things that sort of had cluttered his life up.
Yeah.
It was a bit too late too, which is awful, but
Yeah.
he sort of just let go of all that stuff and was purely who he wanted to be in that moment. It just, yeah, he was particular, I thought. Yeah. Yeah, it's a heartbreaking novel, and I do think though that you do pepper everything with a sense of hope and optimism too. That the teacher's response and even the community's response is really lovely.
Yeah.
Um, was that important too for you? Like you did want to include
Yeah.
that there was an uplift.
Yeah. Oh, definitely, because you can't, well, and also because sad things happen and life goes on.
Hmm.
That's just the way of things, and so there had to be that going on, and the fact that things go on is where the hope is at. I really appreciated the character of Bev and her response to that
Yeah.
outpouring of grief and all of that, because she really she was a character who was willing to get her hands dirty for the Merricks. You know, she paid school fees, and she gave away food that she wasn't meant to give away, and she really understood the complexity of their situation because she had lived it. And I like Bev's voice at that time, sort of saying, well, it's not enough to just strap some flowers and bears on the bridge. We all have a responsibility. And it's not been until I finished writing this book and been touring around and talking about it that I realized that I often get asked, how should we help teachers? And there's all these complex answers that I give. But I realize now that one of the ways we can help teachers is to step up and be part of the village, because we all seem to agree that it takes a village to raise a child. And yet we're all just raising our own children in the village, whereas teachers are expected to be the village and raise everyone's child. And so what we need to do as a community is to just be keeping more of an eye out. And when we see things, calling it out and sort of asking a neighbor, hey, do you need a hand? Or, volunteering somewhere at a place that might be helpful for vulnerable families, things like that. We need to just sort of be a bit more willing, I think, to be active in our village. So I didn't even realize I was writing about that until afterwards. It was interesting. A book can be a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah. It's happened to me too, where I had to have other people explain to me the things I was saying in my book. I guess it's the most honest way to write, it's just like purely from the subconscious, like purely from within. We've got a few people loved Bev punching Janet. Thought Janet was a really interesting. Oh, yeah. So you're nodding too. You enjoyed Bev.
Yeah.
Bev was funny, hey, because she started off and she was a pretty rough character.
Yeah.
She started off. And she doesn't change her character throughout, but you get to see other sides of her almost, where she does that roughness is the thing that can push back against things that aren't right as well. Like she's quite rebellious against the system and rebellious against Janet. Is Bev based on anyone in real life, or is that, where, I guess you might not want to say, but yeah.
I think we've all sort of met an office admin person who's a little bit like Bev, a bit of a dragon at the front office and a gatekeeper. And they're often much needed, and they often have a heart of gold in my experience. And I don't think I could be a school front office person. Like what they must have to field for everything from Band-Aids to school fees to disgruntled parents to a kid that's vomiting, that I don't know. I don't know how they do it. So, but the thing I like about Bev is she's an example of what it is to be a lifelong learner. She's in her 60s, and yet she's still learning. She sees Tyson and makes some pretty politically incorrect judgments to begin with, and by the end she's mates with him, because when you know better, you do better. And when you meet someone and get to know them, that can help you adjust your understanding of their situation and their circumstance. And Bev is open to that. And I think that's what makes her so likable. But I mean, Janet's a great villain and an easy villain. But the thing with Janet was we never had chapters from her. So no one knows. We love to hate her, but we don't know what's going on for her. She could be going through a terrible divorce, or, there could be anything happening for her that causes her to be so abrasive. We just don't know. And yet, every story needs a villain. So Janet was it.
Yeah, but you're right. Every person does have a story, and that's, I think, part of the thing that I love the most about the book were the way that Bev was toing and froing about whether she'd send that message to, sorry, I've forgotten the character's name, starts with an S, I have it written down, Sally Ann.
Yeah.
And she's going to send her this positive message, and then she finally pulls the trigger and sends the message. But when Sally Ann receives it, she's sort of going on her experience of Bev, and she's like, what does she mean? Is she teasing me? Yeah. That stuff is really well done. I loved how you kept the characters so consistent with their point of view. I really appreciated that. We're about out of time. Can we ask what's next for you, Gabbie? Are you working on something else? Are you sort of just taking a rest for a little bit? What's going on?
I am working on something else, but it's the work you do up here, first of all. So I'm thinking something through,
Yeah.
um, and it's really messing with my head because I thought it was one thing and now I think it's something else. And I don't know. And I'm going to have to write the damn thing, Ben, before I realize what it's about. And
That's the best way to figure it out.
it's a lot of work, though. I wish I could just think it through and then write the perfect first draft and be done with it.
Yeah. I mean, I use this metaphor sometimes because my wife is a person who, when she's going on a trip, she'll think about what she's doing and she'll figure out where she has to go and she'll have it all mapped out. She'll research, etc. I'm a guy who packs 30 minutes before I get on the plane and then I figure it out as I go. I wish I could think the way she does.
Yeah.
Are you similar? Do you?
I think I'm trying to be the same. I'm probably more the 30 minutes before we go and
Yeah,
you know
that's me.
figure it out. I'm always like, are there shops where we're going? If there's shops, I'll just buy what I
I'll be
need.
fine. I forgot my toothbrush. Yeah.
It'll be fine. But when you write a book, like I just know how much work it is. So I'm trying to,
Yeah.
you know, game the system and figure out if I could just plot it all in my head and have it perfect, then it'll just be a
Well,
simple matter of
you
pouring it
never
on.
know. This could be the one. This could be it.
If I
You
think
could
through enough, if I think hard enough, Ben, if I
you
just
could
think
get there.
hard enough.
Marilyn, I don't know whether you know the author Marilyn Robinson, but she was asked once about drafting, and she says, "I don't do drafts. I write it right the first time."
We
Takes her
all
10 years to write a book, but man, it made me mad. Mandy has asked, how long did it take to write the first draft of this book? That's actually really interesting. I guess you said you started in 2018. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I started in 2018. Then I had to set it aside and work on Dear Parents. It takes a good year, I reckon, to get a solid draft down. But that I don't work in 40-hour weeks. You know, you're constantly doing other hustles as a writer to keep the wolf from the door. And so you just sort of, you know, getting some snatches of time to be able to write it. But for me, that it takes a year to at least get that first draft down and then the ball's rolling and it seems to go a little bit more quickly. How long does it take you, Ben, to write a draft?
I was just thinking. It depends on the book. I write in about 30-minute segments per day. Like I normally get up at about 5 o'clock and do 30 minutes, or I write after school if I do exercise in the morning. Um, to get a first draft, if I'm on a roll, I can go really quick.
Yep.
But I've also thought about it for like years and, done a lot of reading and researching. So it's hard to quantify times.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it is actually hard. When I'm on a roll, though, it feels good. And then when it's finished, it's like I can mold this into something.
Yep.
Whereas before, it's like, yeah, I always, if I finish a first draft, I celebrate like I'm got an award. Like I need to celebrate that because it's hard every time. It's not doesn't get easier. Um, is your next one going to be in the world of teaching? Can I ask that?
I would actually like to write something completely different,
Yeah.
not about education. I'm really interested in looking at intergenerational female friendship.
Interesting.
I'd like to think about.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes and what happens. And I don't think I can write anything that doesn't have a bit of a blend of funny and feeling. I like
That's your thing.
both. So, I think it would be similar, some nice characters that we can really relate to and feel connected to.
Yeah.
Character drives me a little bit more than plot. So yeah, we'll see. Come back in 12 months and we'll see what I've got done.
We'll have you back on the show next time for sure, with no technical difficulties, I'm sure. But yeah, Gabbie, it's been really lovely to chat with you. And a few people have said in chat, and Chris has said, thank you for all your advocacy. And yeah, we really appreciate you and appreciate your time tonight with us all, and appreciate you writing this book. I think you've got a lot of new fans, and I think, yeah, you've got a lot of fans, Gabbie. A lot of people love this book, which is huge. It's very hard to do that. So really appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, guys. Happy reading, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Just very quickly before everyone goes, next month, you'll already find the event online. We are reading this one, which is a debut, This is Violet. Does that look backwards to you, or is it just my camera that reverses it? It's the right way. Okay, cool. Violet Kelly and the Jade Owl, which it looks in Sydney, 1930. It looks like it's kind of like a sexy noir crime thing, I think, like with some adventure. Looks pretty cool. So excited to read that one. And I'll post all this stuff onto the interweb, the Facebook group. Actually, I forgot to, if you're not on the group, which I'm expecting most of you are, there's the link in the chat if you want to join up. Every month we talk to a different author about their work. Tonight was Gabbie. Next month we'll be talking with Fiona Britton with her first book. But Gabbie, we'll see you in 2 years or whatever when the next when the next one's out.
It's a date. Can't wait.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys for everything. This has been Ben's Book Club hosted by Libby. And yeah, look forward to seeing you guys next month. Bye.